Hello there, and welcome. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. In our busy, brightly lit world, it's not often we get a chance to simply be, to let the noise of the day fade away and appreciate the quiet corners of history. Tonight, we're going to do just that. We're going to travel back in time, not to the grand courts of kings or the heat of the battlefield, but to a place of supposed peace, a medieval monastery. We'll explore the lives of the monks who called it home, and perhaps uncover a few of the harsh, hidden truths they lived with every single day. It's a story of quiet devotion, but also one of profound, unspoken struggles. Before we begin our journey, if you find a moment of peace here with us, I would be so grateful if you would leave a gentle like on this video. It helps our small community of history dreamers find each other. And please feel free to leave a comment, letting us know where you're listening from. It always amazes me how many of you are listening from different parts of the world, all finding rest under the same moon. It's a wonderful thought, isn't it? All of us connected by a quiet story. Now let's begin to settle in. Find that cozy spot in your bed. Let your head feel heavy and supported on your pillow. Pull the covers up and feel their gentle weight. Take a slow, deep breath in. And as you breathe out, let your body melt into the bed. Release the day. Let your shoulders soften, your jaw unclench, and allow your eyes to gently close. There is nothing else you need to do right now. But listen, you've just woken up. The last thing you remember is the familiar comfort of your own bed. But now something is different. You blink awake, not to the soft light of a lamp, but to a profound and heavy darkness. The air is cold. Truly cold. It seeps into your bones, carrying the damp, earthy smell of ancient stone and wet straw. You're lying on a mattress, but it's not soft. It's coarse, rustling with every small movement you make. It's a straw pallet, laid upon a simple wooden frame. A distant bell begins to toll. A single, solemn chime that echoes through the stillness. 1, 2, 3. It's the middle of the night. You can hear the soft, rhythmic breathing of others nearby, the shuffle of wool on stone. You're not alone. You are in the heart of the 12th century. The world outside these walls is a tapestry of feudal lords, burgeoning towns, and quiet forests. But your world is here, within the thick, unyielding walls of the Abbey of St. Jude the Obscure. You are a novice, a young man who has just joined the order, leaving your former life behind forever. You came here seeking salvation, peace, a refuge from the harshness of the medieval world. But as you lie here in the freezing dark, listening to that lonely bell calling you to the first prayers of the day, a thought whispers through your mind. What secrets does this sacred silence hold? What harsh realities lie beneath the gentle chants and holy vows? Let's explore them together. Let's drift back and uncover the hidden world of the medieval monk. In the popular imagination, the life of a medieval monk is one of serene simplicity. We picture robed figures gliding silently through sun-dappled cloisters, their days measured by the ringing of bells and the peaceful rhythm of prayer. We see them bent over magnificent manuscripts, their hands patiently illuminating God's word, or tending to gardens bursting with herbs and life. And in many ways, this image holds a kernel of truth. The monastery was designed to be an oasis of order in a chaotic and often brutal world. It was a fortress of faith, a repository of knowledge, and for many, a genuine path to spiritual fulfillment. Men from all walks of life, from the sons of noblemen to the sons of peasants, sought refuge and purpose within its walls. They came to escape war, famine, or the simple, grinding poverty of medieval life. In exchange, they accepted a life of profound discipline. This discipline was governed by a sacred text, not from the Bible, but a book of rules written by a man named Benedict of Nursia hundreds of years before, in the 6th century. His guide, known as the Rule of St. Benedict, became the blueprint for Western monasticism. It was a remarkably insightful document, a constitution for a miniature, self-sufficient society dedicated entirely to God. The rule dictated everything. What time you woke up, what you ate, what you wore, what work you did, and even when you were permitted to speak. The vows were absolute: poverty, renouncing all personal possessions, chastity, a life without romantic love or physical intimacy, and obedience, surrendering your will completely to the authority of the abbot, the man who acted as the father of the monastery. But these simple vows, these pillars of monastic life, conceal a world of harsh and hidden struggles. The silence could be a torment, the labor backbreaking, and the enforced community a source of quiet friction and secret resentments. The quest for spiritual purity was often a battle against the simple, undeniable realities of being human. So tonight, let's you and I drift back through the centuries. Let us walk these cold stone corridors not just as observers, but as fellow travelers. You don't need to hold on to any of these facts. Just allow the story to wash over you. We will gently uncover the secrets hidden within the vows, the silence, and the daily rituals of the medieval monk. Let's begin our journey with the very foundation of their world, the rule that promised salvation, but demanded everything in return. As the first faint hints of dawn struggle to pierce the high, narrow windows of the dormitory, you are already awake. The vow of poverty begins not as a grand gesture, but as a simple, cold reality. It is in the air you breathe, the floor beneath your feet, and the clothes upon your back. The wool of your habit is coarse against your skin. It is not yours. It belongs to the monastery, a temporary loan from God, administered by the abbot. Like the simple leather belt at your waist and the hard wooden sandals placed neatly on the stone floor beside your pallet, it is a uniform. You are allowed 2 tunics and 2 cowls, one to wear while the other is being washed by a lay brother in a vat of harsh lye soap and cold water. There is no choice of color, no adornment, nothing at all to distinguish you from the brother sleeping to your left, or the one on your right. This is the first and most constant lesson of poverty. The shedding of the self, the slow, methodical erasure of the man you used to be. You came to this place from a small village nestled in a river valley, a place where your family had little. But even in that humble life, you had things. You had a wooden cup, dark with age, carved by your father during the long winter nights. You had a small leather pouch, its surface smoothed by the touch of your own hands, where you kept the odd coin you might earn at the market fair. You had a worn woolen blanket, patched in 3 places, that had been handed down from your grandmother. It still held the faint, smoky smell of your family's hearth. These small things were your anchors. They tethered you to your life, to your name, to your place in the world. Upon entering the gates of the Abbey of St. Jude the Obscure, these things were taken from you. It was not done cruelly. The cellarer, the monk in charge of all provisions, took them with a gentle nod. He placed them in a large wooden chest with the belongings of other novices. The abbot explained the reason, his voice soft but as firm and unyielding as the stone walls around you. He told you that personal possessions were roots that held a man's soul in the profane soil of the world. They were anchors, yes, but they anchored you to sin and vanity, to pride and earthly attachment. To own nothing, he had said, his eyes looking past you, towards something you could not yet see, is to be open to receiving everything from God. But the reality of that philosophy, in the cold hours before matins, is a quiet, gnawing emptiness. In the dormitory, a long, open room with dozens of other men, there is no private space. No drawer to hold a secret memento. No hidden corner to call your own. The very concept of mine has become a sin to be confessed. You might hear a fellow novice whisper in the confessional, his voice trembling, that he felt a sense of pride in the way his sandals had, over many months, molded perfectly to the shape of his feet. And the confessor would nod gravely, assigning extra prayers for this attachment to a worldly comfort, this sin of finding a personal connection to a communal object. You learn to see everything as transient, as merely passing through your hands. This vow is a constant, grinding pressure, a subtle weight on your soul that you feel at all hours. Monks are forbidden from receiving letters or gifts from their families without the abbot's express permission. If a package were to arrive from your village, perhaps carried by a traveling merchant, it would be delivered directly to the abbot. He would open it in his private study. He, and he alone, would decide if the contents were appropriate for a man of God. A warm pair of socks, knitted by a worried mother to ward off the chill of the stone floors, might be deemed a luxury. A temptation. The abbot might decide to give them to an older, more infirm brother as an act of communal charity. A book of poetry, sent from a wealthy uncle who did not understand your new life, would be placed immediately into the common library, its elegant binding a stark contrast to the plain, functional volumes already on the shelves. This is all done to sever the bonds of your past, to make the monastery your only family, the abbot your only father, and the brothers your only kin. Your earthly attachments must wither, so that your heavenly ones may grow. You don't need to remember this part, but you can let it drift through your mind. The founders of these holy orders, men like Saint Benedict, were brilliant students of human nature. They understood its deep and profound frailties. They knew that the temptation to possess, to have something of one's very own, was one of the most powerful and persistent urges. It is why the Rule of Saint Benedict has specific, unbending chapters dedicated to this very problem. If a monk were to be found hiding any personal item, a single coin, a colored ribbon from a forgotten festival, a small knife sharper than the standard ones issued for work, it was considered a grave and serious offense. It was a sign that the world still had its hooks in his soul. The punishment was not meant to be vengeful, but medicinal. Its purpose was to cure the sickness of ownership. It was often a public shaming. In the daily chapter meeting, the offending object would be held up for all to see, and the monk would have to prostrate himself on the cold floor before his brothers. He might be sentenced to a period of fasting, eating only bread and water, while his brothers ate their warm vegetable pottage. Or, for a truly serious offense, he could face temporary excommunication from the community. This was the harshest punishment of all. You would eat alone. You would pray alone in the back of the chapel. You would work alone. No brother would be permitted to speak to you or even make eye contact. You would be utterly and completely isolated, a ghost within your own home, until you had truly, deeply repented for the sin of wanting something to call your own. You may already be drifting off, and that's perfectly all right. Just allow the feeling of this place to surround you. Let your mind drift and imagine the sensation, the constant, lived awareness that nothing you touch is truly yours. The hoe you use in the vegetable garden, its wooden handle smoothed by the hands of a dozen monks before you. The quill you use in the scriptorium, its feather trimmed just so, which will be passed to another brother when your task is done. The rough wooden bowl you eat your thin, watery porridge from each morning. All of it belongs to the collective, to the abbey, to God. This practice was intended to foster a deep and abiding humility, to make a man entirely reliant on God and on his brothers for his every need. It was designed to free the soul from the prison of material desire. But for many, especially in the first few years, it was a source of deep, unspoken frustration. A hidden trial. It was a stripping away of the person you once were, layer by layer, until only the monk remained. You sometimes see it in the eyes of the older brothers. A kind of placid emptiness. A peaceful surrender. They have successfully untethered themselves from the world. But you also see, in the tense shoulders of a fellow novice, the struggle. The fight to suppress the simple human urge to have a space, an object, a single solitary thing that reflects who you are. It is a paradox. You have joined a community of hundreds, yet you have never felt so alone. The vow of poverty creates a vast internal space, empty of the clutter of a former life. The abbot says this space is for God to enter. But sometimes in the dead of night, when the dormitory is filled with the soft sounds of sleeping men, that emptiness feels less like a holy space and more like a profound and desolate void. The challenge is not to fill that void with memories or desires, but to simply let it be. To find peace not in having, but in being. To let go of your name, your past, your cup, your coin, your blanket, and to float untethered in the vast, silent ocean of God's love. But it is a difficult and sometimes harsh lesson to learn. And tonight, it is a lesson that feels as cold and unyielding as the stone beneath your straw bed. The bell will ring soon for prayers, and you will rise, putting on the clothes of the monastery, to begin another day of owning nothing. The day unfolds in a world without words. The shuffling of feet on stone, the distant clang of a hammer, the whisper of wind in the cloister garden. These are the sounds that fill the great silence. The prayers have ended. The last echo of the final chant has dissolved into the high, vaulted ceiling of the chapel. And as you and your brothers file out into the cloister, a quiet so deep it feels like a physical presence descends upon the monastery. This is the Silentium Magnum, the great silence, and it will last for most of the day. It is not merely a suggestion to be quiet. It is a sacred rule. Your voice, the very tool of your personality, the vessel of your thoughts and feelings, is now locked away. To speak a word without express permission would be a transgression, a tear in the holy fabric of this stillness. But life must go on. The monastery is not a silent tomb. It is a living, breathing community, a working farm, a school, a library, and a hospital, all in one. Communication is essential for the thousand small tasks that must be done. And so, you must learn a new language, a silent one spoken not with the throat and tongue, but with the hands and eyes. This is not a simple game of charades, improvised on the spot. It is a complex and formal sign language, developed over centuries, with hundreds of precise gestures recorded in monastic books, so that a brother from this abbey in England could, in theory, communicate with a brother from a monastery in Italy. The language of silence is universal. You learn it slowly, day by day. To ask for bread during a meal, you make a circle with your thumb and forefinger and bring it towards your mouth, mimicking the shape of a small loaf. For fish, a staple of the monastic diet, you extend your flattened hand and wave it gently from side to side like a tail fin gliding through water. If you are in the library and need the Book of Psalms, you place your open hands on either side of your head, like a crown, in honor of its author, King David. A sign for the abbot is to place a single finger on your forehead, signifying his authority. A sign for a novice, like yourself, is to gently tug on the hood of your own cowl. Imagine yourself now in the great dining hall, the refectory. You are seated on a long, worn wooden bench, the surface polished smooth by the robes of countless monks who have sat here before you. The only sound permitted is the gentle, rhythmic clinking of spoons against wooden bowls and the steady, monotonous drone of a single voice. At the front of the hall stands the designated reader for the week, his voice clear but devoid of emotion, as he reads from the lives of the saints or the writings of the early church fathers. You listen, but you do not speak. If you need more water to thin your pottage, you cannot call out to the lay brother serving the tables. You must wait patiently until you can catch his eye. Then you make the sign for water, letting your fingers flow downwards from a cupped hand. He will see, give a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and bring the heavy earthenware pitcher to your place. This constant vigilance, this need to communicate without a voice, fundamentally changes how you perceive the world around you. Your ears, no longer waiting for speech, learn to hear other things. The squeak of a brother's sandal, the rustle of a woolen sleeve, the distant bleating of a sheep from the fields. Your eyes, now your primary tool for connection, become incredibly sharp. You learn to read the subtle language of the body. You can tell by the slight slump of a brother's shoulders that he is weary. You can see the frustration in the tightening of his jaw as he struggles with a difficult passage in the scriptorium. You can sense the quiet contentment of another in the gentle, relaxed way his hands rest upon the table. You become an observer of incredible focus, a reader not of words, but of men. You may already be drifting off, and that is perfectly right. There is no need to hold on to these details. Just let the deep and profound quiet of this place seep into your own room, into your own mind. The silence of the monks was not meant to be empty. It was designed to be filled with God. The abbot teaches that the human tongue is the source of 1,000 sins. Gossip that poisons the community, slander that ruins a man's name, idle chatter that wastes precious time, and prideful speech that elevates the self. By quieting the outer world, by taming the tongue, a monk could hope to better hear the still, small voice of the divine within. The silence was a tool for contemplation, a vessel to be filled with prayer. It was a way of walking through the world as if in a constant state of listening. But this sacred silence, like the vow of poverty, had its own harsh and hidden side. For all its holy intentions, it could be incredibly, painfully isolating. Imagine having a simple, practical question about your work in the herb garden. Are these roots to be dried in the sun or in the shade? You must find your superior, the master of the gardens, and hope he understands your clumsy, novice hand signs. Imagine having a moment of profound insight during your private reading, a complex theological thought that you yearn to discuss and explore. You cannot. You must hold it within, letting it cool and fade, or attempt to convey it later with your limited gestures, often to be misunderstood. And worse, imagine a moment of deep sadness. Perhaps a memory of your family has surfaced, bringing with it a wave of homesickness that feels like a physical ache in your chest. You look around at the silent figures of your brothers, each lost in his own world of work and prayer, and you cannot share your burden. You cannot speak of it. You must simply bear it, alone, in the echoing chamber of your own mind. This inability to express oneself, to find the simple comfort of a shared word, could lead to immense frustration, a building of inner pressure with no release. Resentments between brothers, born of a misunderstanding or a perceived slight, could fester for weeks in the quiet, communicated only through sharp glances across the refectory or a pointed refusal to meet another's eyes. There were a few designated places where speech was permitted. In the presence of the abbot in his study, one could speak and be spoken to. And some monasteries had a room called the locutorium, or parlor, where monks could speak with visitors from the outside world or have necessary work-related conversations with one another. But even there, the conversation was expected to be purposeful and brief. The sweetest release for many came during the daily chapter meeting, when the community gathered to discuss the business of the abbey and confess their public faults. For that short period, voices would fill the room, and the relief of it, the simple human joy of speech, was almost dizzying. But just as quickly as it began, the bell would ring, a signal for the end of the meeting, and the great, heavy blanket of silence would fall once more, muffling the world. This constant suppression of a fundamental human impulse was one of the harshest, most hidden trials of monastic life. It was a psychological crucible that could, for some, lead to a state of profound spiritual insight and inner peace. But for others, it could lead to a quiet, desperate loneliness, a feeling of being trapped inside oneself. It was a daily battle fought not against an external enemy, but against the very nature of being human. The silence was a path to God, but it was a path that required you to leave a vital part of yourself behind. As the quiet hum of the monastery settles deep into your mind, let it be a sound of peace. And know that elsewhere in the kingdom of silence, another kind of work was being done. A work not of the soul, but of the body, a struggle etched not in the mind, but in the muscles and the soil. The bells have called you from prayer, but not to rest. There is a phrase you hear repeated by the older monks, a phrase that is the very heartbeat of this place, ora et labora. Pray and work. The two are not separate activities. They are intertwined, like the threads of a single sturdy rope. Your prayers are meant to sanctify your work, and your work is meant to be a living prayer. And the work is hard. It is a reality that greets you as you step out of the cloister's quiet shade and into the wide, open air of the abbey's grounds. The vow of poverty stripped you of your possessions. The vow of silence took your voice. But it is the life of labor that seeks to tame your body itself, to make it a willing instrument in the service of God. The Abbey of St. Jude is a self-sufficient world, a small, walled kingdom that must produce everything it needs to survive. It must grow its own food, raise its own animals, mill its own flour, and brew its own ale, which is often safer to drink than the local water. And this is all accomplished by the hands of the monks. Today, your hands are destined for the earth. You follow a line of brothers to the tool shed, where you take a heavy hoe, its wooden handle worn smooth and dark by the grip of countless hands before yours. Out in the fields, the sun is beginning to climb, but the earth is still cool and damp from the morning dew. A senior monk, his face a testament to years of this life, points to a section of the vast vegetable patch, already overrun with the first tenacious weeds of spring. He makes a simple gesture, and the meaning is clear. Your work is here. You find your place in the long row of stooped figures and begin. The work is simple, monotonous. You lift the heavy hoe, bring its iron blade down into the dark soil, and pull, tearing the weeds up by their roots. Lift, chop, pull. Lift, chop, pull. The rhythm begins to take over your body. At first, your mind wanders. You think of the prayers from the morning, you think of a snatch of chant, you think of the hardness of your bed. But soon, the sheer physical reality of the work burns away all other thought. The sun climbs higher, and the coolness of the morning gives way to a persistent warmth that settles on your shoulders and the back of your neck. You feel a trickle of sweat trace a path down your temple. The muscles in your back, unaccustomed to this particular strain, begin to complain with a dull, persistent ache. Your hands, still soft from your previous life, begin to feel the first hints of blisters forming where they grip the unforgiving wood of the hoe. Lift, chop, pull. The world shrinks until it is nothing more than this small patch of earth, the glint of sun on the hoe's blade, and the satisfying tear of roots from the soil. You don't need to remember this, but the early church fathers taught that idleness was the enemy of the soul. It was in moments of idleness, they believed, that the devil could whisper his temptations of doubt and despair. Labor, therefore, was a spiritual shield. It was a way to keep the body so occupied, the muscles so weary, that the mind had no energy left for sin. It was a form of penance, a way to share in the suffering that Adam brought upon the world when he was cast out of the Garden of Eden to toil by the sweat of his brow. Each drop of sweat that falls from your face onto the abbey's soil is seen as a prayer, a small liquid jewel offered to God. Let your own body feel the gentle weariness described in this story. Let the feeling of hard work bring you to a place of deep and deserved rest. The monks found a strange kind of peace in this exhaustion. When you are truly tired, your anxieties seem smaller, more distant. The endless churn of the mind can finally grow quiet. Hours pass. The sun reaches its zenith. The bell rings for midday prayer, a welcome respite. You and your brothers pause your work, straighten your aching backs, and file back to the chapel. The prayers are short, and then it is time for the main meal of the day. It is a simple meal of thick bread, vegetable pottage, and weak ale, but it tastes more delicious than any feast you have ever known. The hunger born of honest labor is a sauce that makes any food a banquet. After the meal, you return to the fields. The afternoon sun is hotter now. The work feels harder. The rhythm is more difficult to maintain. Your mind, once cleared by the monotony, now begins to struggle. It is here that the true battle is fought. It is easy to see the work as a curse, a mindless chore. It is easy to let resentment creep in. Resentment for the heat, for the aching in your back, for the blisters now raw on your palms. The real labor is not in the lifting of the hoe, but in the lifting of the heart. The true challenge is to see the face of God in this muddy field. It is to offer up your pain as a prayer, to find holiness in the sweat and the dirt. You see one of the older monks, a man well past 60, working steadily beside you. His face is calm, his movements economical and graceful despite his age. He is not fighting the work. He has become one with it. His labor is a meditation, a silent, moving psalm. You try to emulate him, to quiet the complaints of your body and your mind, and to simply be present in the work. Lift, chop, pull. This daily toil was a great equalizer. Within the abbey walls lived the sons of powerful noblemen, sent here for a spiritual education or because they were not the firstborn heir. And beside them worked the sons of simple peasants who knew no other life but this. In the chapel, their ranks might be subtly observed, but out here, in the fields, covered in the same dust and sweat, they were identical. The sun did not care about a man's lineage, and the soil yielded its bounty only to the calloused hand, not the noble name. This humility, learned through shared hardship, was one of the most powerful lessons the monastery could teach. As the sun begins its slow descent towards the horizon, the bell rings once more. The workday is over. You carry your hoe back to the shed, your arms feeling heavy, your legs unsteady with fatigue. Your whole body is humming with a deep weariness that is both painful and deeply satisfying. You have earned your rest. That night, sleep will not be a coy visitor you must woo. It will be a vast, dark, dreamless ocean, and you will fall into it the moment your head touches the straw pallet, pulled down into its depths by the welcome weight of your own exhaustion. But not all labor at the Abbey was a battle against the soil and the sun. As the afternoon wore on, and the heavy tools were cleaned and stored, some brothers were called to a different kind of work. A quieter toil fought not with the broad muscles of the back and shoulders, but with the fine muscles of the hand and the unwavering focus of the eye. A struggle that took place not in the open field, but in a small, chilled room where silence and ink reigned supreme. But not all labor at the Abbey was a battle against the soil and the sun. As the afternoon wore on, and the heavy tools were cleaned and stored, some brothers were called to a different kind of work. A quieter toil fought not with the broad muscles of the back and shoulders, but with the fine muscles of the hand and the unwavering focus of the eye. A struggle that took place not in the open field, but in a small, chilled room where silence and ink reigned supreme. This was the scriptorium, the writing room, the place where the word of God was made flesh upon the page. You are one of the brothers chosen for this task. You leave the warmth of the afternoon sun behind and enter the north walk of the cloister, where the scriptorium is often located. The air in here is immediately colder, a damp chill that seems to emanate from the thick stone walls. There is no fireplace. The risk of fire to the precious, irreplaceable books is too great a danger to contemplate. The only warmth is the warmth of your own body, which the cold seems determined to steal. You take your place at a tall, slanted wooden desk, designed to hold a page at the perfect angle for writing. The stool is hard and backless, forcing you to support your own weight for the long hours ahead. On the desk, your tools are laid out with a surgeon's precision. A small knife, not for cutting, but for scraping away errors on the parchment. A piece of pumice stone to smooth the surface of the page. And all to prick tiny, almost invisible guide holes down the margins. And most importantly, the quills and the ink. The quills are from a goose, their tips sharpened to a razor-fine point. The ink is a deep, rich black, made from oak galls or the soot of burnt candles, mixed with gum and water. There is another pot as well, a smaller one, holding the precious rubric, the red ink made from minerals or insects, used for titles and the first letter of a new chapter. Your task today is to continue your work on a copy of the Gospels. The original book, loaned from a wealthy sister abbey, rests on a stand nearby. Your job is not to create, not to interpret, but to replicate. Perfectly. You take a fresh sheet of parchment. You don't need to hold on to this detail, but just imagine the feel of it. It's not like paper. It is vellum, made from the prepared skin of a calf. It is smooth, almost creamy, but also tough and incredibly expensive. A single book might require the skins of an entire herd of animals. To waste a single page through carelessness is a grave and costly sin. Before you can write a single word, you must rule the page. Using a straight edge and a piece of lead, you draw faint, silvery lines across the parchment, creating a perfect grid for your letters to rest upon. The process is slow, meditative. It is a prayer of preparation. Then, you dip your quill into the black ink. You hold your breath for a moment, steady your hand, and touch the point to the page. The scratch of the nib on the vellum is the only sound you make, a tiny, dry whisper in the profound silence of the room. You form the first letter, then the next, then the next. Your eyes flick back and forth, from the master copy to your own, ensuring every curve, every line, every dot is an exact match. The work is incredibly slow. A single, beautifully decorated page might take an entire day. A whole book could take many months, even years, of this patient, relentless labor. Let the slow, steady rhythm of this work soothe your own thoughts. Let the image of the scribe's patient hand calm your mind. There is no rush here. There is only the page, the ink, and the steady passage of time. This quiet, scholarly work might seem like a peaceful escape from the back-breaking toil of the fields, but it carried its own harsh, hidden burdens. Your back, bent over the desk, begins to ache with a familiar fire. Your shoulders are tight with tension, but the greatest strain is on your hand and your eyes. After an hour, your fingers begin to cramp around the quill, a painful condition the monks called scribe's palsy. You must pause, flex your fingers, and try to massage the feeling back into them before you can continue. Your eyes, too, begin to burn from the strain of focusing on the tiny letters in the dim, gray light. As the afternoon fades, the light from the cloister windows weakens, and the page becomes a shadowy landscape. You have to lean closer, your nose almost touching the vellum, to see what you are doing. The strain causes your head to throb with a dull, persistent ache. And then there is the cold. It is a constant companion in the scriptorium. It seeps through your woolen habit, up from the stone floor, making your fingers stiff and clumsy. You might see a brother nearby subtly blowing on his hands, trying to bring some life back into them before dipping his quill once more. Beyond the physical toll, there was the immense mental pressure. The concentration required was absolute. A moment's distraction, a wandering thought, could lead to a skipped word or a repeated line. A mistake meant you had to take your sharp scraping knife and carefully, painstakingly, scratch the ink from the surface of the vellum without tearing it, leaving a faint, ghostly scar on the page. Too many such scars, and the page would be ruined. The pressure to be perfect, hour after hour, day after day, was a heavy weight. It was its own form of exhaustion, a mental weariness that could be just as draining as a day spent digging ditches. And yet, in this world of rigid control and perfect replication, the human spirit found a way to whisper. While the main text was sacred, the edges of the page, the margins, were a kind of frontier. And it is here, in the marginalia, that you find the secret language of the scribes. It was a place for a monk to leave a tiny, anonymous trace of himself. You might be copying a solemn passage on damnation, and in the margin, draw a tiny, whimsical doodle of a cat chasing a mouse, or a snail engaged in a heroic battle with a knight. These drawings seem bizarre to us now, but they were a moment of creative escape. Sometimes the notes were more direct. A scribe in a cold Irish monastery famously wrote in the margin of his manuscript, in his native Gaelic, "It is cold tonight. The wind is bitter. God knows I am weary." Another, finishing his work, scribbled at the bottom of the page, "The work is finished, thank God." These were not prayers. They were small, human sighs of relief, of frustration, of boredom, captured forever on the edge of the holy text. It was a secret conversation across the centuries, a reminder that the hands that wrote these perfect, sacred words were the hands of a real person, a man who got cold and tired, and who sometimes just wanted the day to be over. And as the scribe finishes a page, holding it up to the faint light to check for errors, his responsibility for that small piece of work is immense. But his burden is finite. It ends with the final word on the final page. Elsewhere in the abbey, another man sits with a burden that never ends. A man who does not worry about a single page, but about every book, every field, every prayer, and every soul within these walls. A man whose work is the monastery itself. And as the scribe finishes a page, holding it up to the faint light to check for errors, his responsibility for that small piece of work is immense. But his burden is finite. It ends with the final word on the final page. Elsewhere in the abbey, another man sits with a burden that never ends. A man who does not worry about a single page, but about every book, every field, every prayer, and every soul within these walls. A man whose work is the monastery itself. This is the abbot. He sits alone in his study, a small room adjacent to the chapel. A single beeswax candle, a luxury not afforded to the common monks, pushes back the darkness. The rest of the abbey is asleep, lost in the deep, earned slumber of the weary. But the abbot is often awake at this hour. For him, sleep is a visitor who does not always call. His position sets him apart, places him in a quiet, lonely space between his brothers and God. According to the rule of Saint Benedict, the abbot holds the place of Christ within the monastery. His authority is absolute. His word is law. He is elected by the brothers to be their father, their guide, their judge, and their protector. The monks vow to obey him without question, seeing in his commands the will of God. It is a position of immense power, but it is also a crushing weight, because the rule makes one thing terrifyingly clear. On Judgment Day, the abbot will be held personally accountable for the soul of every single man under his care. Let your mind gently consider this weight. You don't need to carry it, only observe it. Imagine being responsible not just for your own actions, but for the spiritual well-being of 100 other men. If a brother falls into despair, if a novice gives up and leaves, if a monk harbors a secret sin in his heart, the abbot believes that God will see it as his failure. A failure of his teaching, his guidance, his prayer, his example. So while his monks sleep, he is often on his knees, praying not for himself, but for them. Praying for Brother Thomas, who struggles with pride. For Brother Philip, who seems lost in a fog of sadness. For you, the young novice, that your faith might take root in this rocky soil. His nights are a quiet, unseen vigil. His days are a chain of difficult decisions. He is the community's judge, and his judgment must be tempered with a wisdom he constantly prays for. A young monk, tasked with tending the abbey's small flock of sheep, confesses that he fell asleep in the sun, and a wolf stole one of the lambs. The abbey has lost a source of wool and meat. The abbot must assign a penance. Should it be harsh, to teach the importance of vigilance? Or should it be gentle, to avoid crushing the spirit of an already remorseful young man? He looks at the downcast face of the brother and sees not just a shepherd, but a soul in his care. His decision must be a medicine, not a punishment. Two older monks, who have lived side by side for 20 years, are locked in a silent, bitter feud over some long-forgotten slight. It is a poison that is beginning to affect the harmony of the entire community. He must call them both to his study. He must listen, counsel, and command them to reconcile. He must be a peacemaker, even when the hearts of men are hard. He also carries the entire weight of the monastery's worldly existence. He is the chief steward of a large and complex estate. He must ensure that the abbey's affairs are in order, a task that forces him to engage with the very world his monks have renounced. He must meet with traveling merchants to negotiate the price for the abbey's surplus wool. He must speak with local lords, carefully navigating issues of land rights and taxes. He must be a farmer, worrying when the rains don't come, calculating if the grain in the storehouse will last through the winter. He must be a builder, deciding when the chapel roof must be repaired and how to pay for the expensive lead needed for the work. This is the great hidden paradox of his life. He must be a man of God, detached from earthly concerns, yet he is forced to be a man of business, a politician, and a manager. He must handle money, but he has taken a vow of poverty. He must wield power, but he must remain humble. He must command others, but he must serve them all. This constant balancing act is a source of quiet, unending strain. And through it all, he is alone. He cannot confide his deepest worries to the prior, his second in command, for he must always project an aura of serene certainty. He cannot show his own doubt or weariness to his brothers, for they look to him as their rock, their unwavering spiritual father. His conversations are about the souls of others or the business of the abbey. Rarely are they about the state of his own heart. The silence he observes is not the communal silence of the refectory or the scriptorium. It is the profound and isolating silence of leadership. So he sits in his study, the joys and sorrows, the sins and triumphs of his community resting upon his shoulders. He is the eye of the storm, the still point around which the life of the abbey turns. The burden is immense, a secret known only to him and to his God. He freely chose this burden when he accepted the title of abbot, believing that in carrying the troubles of his brothers, he was helping to carry the cross of Christ. It is a harsh and lonely path, but for him, it is the only path that leads to salvation. He asks for strength, not for the load to be lightened, but for his shoulders to be made broader. And one of the abbot's most pressing temporal duties, the one that occupies his thoughts through the lean months of winter, is the simple, earthy matter of food. For while he worries about the state of the harvest and the fullness of the granary, his brothers experience his success or failure in the most direct way possible, in the contents of their simple, wooden bowls. And one of the abbot's most pressing temporal duties, the one that occupies his thoughts through the lean months of winter, is the simple, earthy matter of food. For while he worries about the state of the harvest and the fullness of the granary, his brothers experience his success or failure in the most direct way possible, in the contents of their simple, wooden bowls. The ringing of the refectory bell is a welcome sound, a signal of rest and sustenance, but the meal itself is another lesson in discipline. You file into the long, high-ceilinged dining hall in silence. The air is cool and smells faintly of boiled vegetables, damp stone, and beeswax from the lector's candle. You take your assigned place at the long, dark-wood table, its surface scarred with the knife marks and spoon scrapes of generations of monks. You bow your head as the abbot says grace, a swift prayer of thanks in Latin. Then, the only sound is the shuffling of the lay brothers as they move along the tables, ladling out the day's meal, and the steady, dispassionate voice of the lector, who has already begun his reading from the lives of the saints. The meal is designed to sustain the body, but not to please it. Pleasure, especially the pleasure of the palate, was seen as a dangerous doorway to the sin of gluttony. And so the food is simple, repetitive, and profoundly humble. In your bowl is a thick pottage, a stew made from whatever the garden has provided. Today it is mostly turnips and onions, boiled for hours until they are soft, thickened with barley. Alongside the bowl is a hunk of dark, heavy bread. It is dense and coarse, made from rye or barley flour, not the fine wheat flour used by the rich. It is nutritious, but it is a chore to chew. To drink, you have a beaker of weak, watery ale. It is more hydrating than it is intoxicating, and often safer to drink than water from the well. This is the meal. Not just for today, but for most days. The seasons might bring some variation, beans and greens in the summer, cabbage and parsnips in the winter. But the fundamental character of the food never changes. It is fuel, nothing more. You eat slowly, your eyes cast downwards. You are supposed to be listening to the sacred reading, feeding your soul as you feed your body. The meal is a meditation, a practice in mindfulness, but the focus is on God, not on the food. You do not need to remember this, but the rule of Saint Benedict was very specific about diet. It strictly forbade the eating of the flesh of four-footed animals for everyone except for the very sick. In a world where a feast of roasted meat was a sign of wealth, power, and celebration, this was a profound act of renunciation. It was a constant, daily reminder that you had turned your back on the ways of the world. Fish was permitted if the abbey was fortunate enough to have a stew pond or be near a river, but for an inland monastery like this one, it was a rare treat. The bulk of your diet comes from the earth, from the things you and your brothers have planted and harvested with your own hands. The portions are measured. The cellarer, the monk in charge of all provisions, ensures that each brother receives enough to sustain him for his work, but no more. You learn to live with a constant low-level state of hunger. Not a painful, gnawing hunger, but a gentle emptiness, a feeling of never being completely full. This, too, is a spiritual tool. It is meant to keep you sharp, to keep your mind from growing sluggish and your body from becoming heavy. It is a reminder of your utter dependence on God for your daily bread. It is a way to feel a quiet solidarity with the truly poor outside the abbey walls, those for whom an empty stomach was not a choice, but a constant, grim reality. Let the idea of this simplicity bring a quiet to your own mind. You don't need to feel their hunger, only understand the peace they sought within it. Let the absence of complexity and choice be a comfort. The hardest part of this discipline is not the monotony of the food itself, but the battle it creates within your own mind. In the quiet of the refectory, it is easy for the mind to wander. You might find yourself remembering, with a startling clarity, the taste of a roasted apple from your childhood, its skin crisp, its flesh sweet and warm. You might imagine the smell of baking bread from a village bakehouse, a smell rich with a promise that your own dark loaf does not fulfill. And this, the abbot teaches, is where the sin of gluttony truly lies. It is not necessarily in overeating, but in the desire, in the longing for pleasure. To take too keen an interest in the food, to wish for a different taste, to dream of a future feast. This was a failure of the spirit, a confession you would have to make. You learn to guard your own thoughts, to push away the phantoms of flavor that rise unbidden in your mind. You focus on the reader's words, on the rough texture of the bread, on the simple act of lifting the spoon to your mouth. You try to find gratitude not for the taste, but for the sustenance, for the simple fact that there is food in your bowl at all. This struggle becomes even more intense during the great fasts of the year. During the 40 days of Lent, the single daily meal is made even smaller. The physical effects are undeniable. A persistent lightheadedness, a weakness in your limbs as you work in the fields, a hollow ache in your stomach that the thinnest of pottages cannot fill. The body is deliberately weakened, in the belief that a weaker body gives the soul more strength. It is a time of profound spiritual warfare, a battle fought against the most basic command of your own body, the command to eat. Some monks achieved a state of spiritual clarity during these fasts, feeling closer to God than ever before. Others simply felt weak, irritable, and profoundly, miserably hungry. It was a harsh and demanding practice, a testament to how seriously they took the battle against the flesh. This life of meager food and hard labor was designed to purify the spirit, but it often took a toll on the body. For when the body, weakened by fasts and worn down by work, inevitably faltered, a monk would be sent to a special place within the abbey. A place where the strict rules were bent, and the battle was no longer against sin, but against sickness and decay. This life of meager food and hard labor was designed to purify the spirit, but it often took a toll on the body. For when the body, weakened by fasts and worn down by work, inevitably faltered, a monk would be sent to a special place within the abbey. A place where the strict rules were bent, and the battle was no longer against sin, but against sickness and decay. This was the infirmary. It begins with a fever that will not break, or a cough that settles deep within your chest, or a wound from a slipped axe in the forest that grows red and angry. You find you cannot rise for the midnight prayers, your head swimming with dizziness. The prior is summoned, his hand cool on your hot forehead. He nods gravely, and you are led, leaning on the arm of a stronger brother, away from the common dormitory, to a separate building near the gardens. The moment you enter the infirmary, you notice the difference. The air in here does not smell of damp stone and unwashed wool. It smells of dried herbs, the sharp scent of lavender, the clean scent of mint, and the faint, sweet smell of chamomile. The light is a little brighter, the windows a little wider. The beds are not mere straw pallets on the floor, but are raised from the ground, and the straw mattress feels thicker, the linen sheets cleaner. It is a quiet, gentle space, a sanctuary within a sanctuary. In charge of this space is the infirmerer, the monk who serves as the abbey's physician. He is usually an older brother, a man chosen for his calm demeanor, his patient hands, and his knowledge of the healing arts. His is a knowledge passed down through generations, learned from ancient books in the library written by Greek and Roman physicians, and mixed with the practical herbal wisdom of the countryside. He greets you with a soft voice, his eyes full of a gentle, diagnostic concern. He is not just a healer of the body, but a caretaker of the soul. He leads you to a bed and helps you lie down. The simple act of resting, of being cared for, is a profound release. The harsh secret of monastic medicine, however, is its simplicity and its reliance on a system that had not changed for 1,000 years. The infirmerer's first task is to determine the cause of your malady, and his understanding is based on the ancient theory of the four humors. He believes the body is governed by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A healthy person has these humors in perfect balance. Sickness, therefore, is an imbalance, too much of one, not enough of another. If your fever is high and your skin is flushed, he may determine you have an excess of blood. His primary treatment, then, will be bloodletting. You do not need to linger on this thought, just let it pass by like a cloud. The practice was not seen as brutal. but as a logical and necessary way to restore the body's natural equilibrium. The infirmer would take your arm, murmur a prayer, and use a small, sharp knife called a lancet to make a swift, clean cut on the inside of your elbow. He would let a small amount of blood, dark against the pallor of your skin, drain into a shallow bowl. He would watch the flow carefully, his experience telling him exactly how much to take to relieve the body of its fiery excess without weakening it too much. To the medieval mind, this was not a violation, but a gentle and necessary retuning of a delicate instrument. For most other ailments, his pharmacy was the garden just outside the window. The infirmary garden was a special place, full of carefully tended plants known for their healing properties. He would walk through it, his robes brushing against the leaves, gathering what he needed. He might crush the leaves of willow bark, known even then to soothe fevers and dull pain. He would brew a calming tea from chamomile flowers to help you rest. For a wound, he would make a poultice from the leaves of comfrey, a plant they called knit bone for its supposed ability to help tissues heal. For a cough, he might give you a syrup made with honey and horehound. His knowledge was a rich tapestry of observation, tradition, and faith. And faith was the most important medicine of all. Sickness was never seen as just a physical event. It was a spiritual trial, a test from God to purify your soul, or perhaps a physical manifestation of some hidden sin. So the infirmer's care was as much for the spirit as it was for the flesh. He would pray with you, anoint your forehead with holy oil, and hear your confession. The healing of the soul was the first step toward the healing of the body. Here in the infirmary, the rigid rule of Saint Benedict was gently bent. You were excused from the long, exhausting cycle of daily prayers in the chapel. You were allowed to sleep through the night. And most significantly, you were given foods forbidden to the healthy monks. The infirmer might bring you a bowl of warm chicken broth, or even a small piece of boiled beef, believing that the strength of the meat was needed to rebuild the strength of your own weakened body. This small, temporary return to the comforts of the world was a profound mercy, a gentle kindness that underscored the harshness of the everyday monastic routine. But the final unspoken truth of the infirmary was that it was often a place for dying. The infirmer's remedies, offered with such faith and care, were often powerless against serious infection, internal ailments, or the devastating plagues that sometimes swept through the land. He could set a broken bone and stitch a wound, but he could not stop the work of a raging infection. In these moments, his role shifted from healer to guide. He would sit by the bedside of the dying monk for hours, offering prayers, wiping his brow, and providing a calm and steady presence to ease the soul's passage from this world to the next. The infirmary was therefore a place of profound acceptance. It was a testament to the monk's belief that life on earth was a fleeting pilgrimage, and that sickness and death were not a final defeat, but simply the last, quiet steps on the journey home to God. And so the life of the abbey continued, a quiet, internal cycle of prayer, labor, sickness, and recovery. The brothers saw their world as a constant spiritual struggle. But the people outside the high stone walls, the villagers in the fields and the nobles in their halls, often saw something very different. They looked upon the abbey's vast lands, its sturdy granaries, and its seeming immunity from the world's chaos. And from their envy and suspicion, a different story began to be told. And so the life of the abbey continued, a quiet, internal cycle of prayer, labor, sickness, and recovery. The brothers saw their world as a constant spiritual struggle, a noble battle fought for the salvation of their souls. But the people outside the high stone walls, the villagers in the fields and the nobles in their halls, often saw something very different. They looked upon the abbey's vast lands, its sturdy granaries, and its seeming immunity from the world's chaos, and from their envy and suspicion, a different story began to be told. Let's drift now beyond the gatehouse and see the Abbey of St. Jude the Obscure through the eyes of a peasant farmer. Imagine you are that farmer. You live your life in a small hut with a thatched roof and a dirt floor, a home you share with your family and, in the winter, your animals. Your life is precarious. It is governed by the rhythm of the seasons, the whims of the local lord, and the constant threat of a bad harvest, which would mean starvation. From your small plot of land, the abbey dominates the horizon. Its stone walls are high and strong, a fortress of security. Its bell tower touches the sky, and the sound of its bell marks your days, reminding you when to work and when to rest. You see the smoke rising from its kitchens and its workshops, a sign of constant activity, and you imagine constant warmth and food. You see the abbey's herds of sheep, fat and healthy, grazing on the best pasture land that your own scrawny goat is forbidden from. You see the monks in their clean, dark robes, moving with a calm purpose that seems a world away from your own frantic struggle for survival. You work a small strip of land that you do not own. You rent it from the abbey. You bring your grain to be ground at the abbey's mill, and you must leave a portion of your flour as payment. The abbot is your landlord. A fair and distant landlord, perhaps, but a landlord nonetheless. And, as you watch your children grow thin in a lean year, you look at the abbey's great stone granary, and you cannot help but wonder what lies within. You have heard stories, murmured over ale in the village tavern, of the monks' wealth, of cellars filled with wine and pantries stocked with cheese and preserved meats. You don't see the brothers' meager pottage, their hard bread, their long fasts. You don't feel the cold of the dormitory or the ache of their labor. You see only the result, an institution that grows wealthier and more powerful year by year, while your own life remains a desperate gamble. And from this place of hardship, a seed of resentment can begin to grow. A story begins to form in your mind, the story of the lazy, well-fed monk who prays all day while you toil, and who lives a life of hidden luxury behind his high walls. Now let us float from the farmer's hut to the drafty hall of the local lord, a knight who lives in a small castle a few miles from the abbey. His view is different, but it is also laced with suspicion. He is a man of war and politics. He sees the world in terms of power, and he sees the abbey as a rival. He may be a patron of the monastery, having donated a piece of land to ensure the monks will pray for his soul and the souls of his ancestors. But he also sees that the abbey's lands are vast, and its abbot is as powerful and influential as he is. The abbot can appeal directly to the bishop, or even to the Pope in Rome, bypassing his authority. The abbey's tenants answer to the abbot's court, not his own. He looks at the abbey's wealth, its knowledge, its political connections, and he feels a prickle of professional jealousy. He hears stories, too, not just from the peasants, but from traveling merchants and other nobles. Stories of other abbeys in other parts of the kingdom, where the abbot lives like a prince, with dozens of servants, a stable of fine horses, and a table laden with roasted swan and spiced wine. He hears the satirical songs of minstrels that mock the supposed piety of monks, painting them as greedy and corrupt. And here lies the most difficult and harsh secret of all. These accusations, these resentful stories from without, were not always entirely false. While you, in the Abbey of St. Jude, live a life of sincere austerity, the narrative of the wealthy, comfortable monk did not arise from nowhere. You don't have to remember this, just let the thought drift by. Over the centuries, many monasteries, through pious gifts and clever management, did accumulate enormous wealth. With wealth sometimes came comfort. In some of the great and ancient abbeys, the old, harsh rule of Saint Benedict had been allowed to soften. The abbot might indeed live in a private, luxurious house. The monks might no longer perform manual labor themselves, leaving it all to lay brothers and paid servants. Their diet might improve, with more meat and wine and spices. They might wear softer wool and sleep in private cells instead of a common dormitory. The ideal of poverty and hardship could, in some places, slowly erode into a life of privilege and ease. These were the exceptions, not the rule, but their existence was enough to fuel the fires of rumor and resentment for 1,000 years. The image of the fat, lazy monk, while a cruel caricature to a truly devout brother, was a recognizable figure in the medieval world. It was the kernel of truth in the accusations from without that made them so powerful and so difficult to refute. It was the gap between the sacred ideal and the sometimes messy, all too human reality. And while these whispers and accusations swirled outside the abbey walls, a different kind of story was sometimes told within them. It wasn't a story of wealth or corruption, but of personal failure. It was the cautionary tale of the brother who could not endure the work, or the silence, or the hunger. The story of the man who one day simply walked away, choosing the uncertainty of the road over the disciplined life, becoming a ghost haunting the edges of the monastic world. And while these whispers and accusations swirled outside the abbey walls, a different kind of story was sometimes told within them. It was not a story of wealth or corruption, but of personal failure. It was a cautionary tale, usually told by the older monks to the novices on a cold winter evening. A story of the brother who could not endure the work, or the silence, or the hunger. The story of the man who one day simply walked away, choosing the uncertainty of the road over the disciplined life, becoming a ghost haunting the edges of the monastic world. His story does not begin with a dramatic act of rebellion. It begins with a slow, quiet unraveling. It begins in the deep stillness of the chapel, when he finds he can no longer pray. The words of the Psalms feel like ash in his mouth. It continues in the fields, under the hot sun, when the rhythm of the work no longer feels like a moving prayer, but like a pointless, endless punishment. It deepens at the refectory table, where the silence, once a space for contemplation, now feels like a crushing weight of loneliness, amplifying the isolation he feels in his own heart. He looks at the serene faces of the older monks, and he sees a peace that he cannot find. He looks at the earnest faces of his fellow novices, and he sees a faith he can no longer feel. The vows he took with such hope, poverty, chastity, obedience, no longer feel like pathways to freedom, but like the bars of a cage he has willingly locked himself inside. The disciplines that were meant to empty him of self so that God could enter have instead hollowed him out, leaving a vast, aching void that God, it seems, has chosen not to fill. This is a terrifying state, a spiritual vertigo that is the beginning of his fall. The decision to leave is made in the dead of night. There is no plan, no destination. There is only the overwhelming, desperate need to escape the crushing weight of his own failure. He waits until the dormitory is filled with the deep, rhythmic breathing of sleeping men. He rises from his straw pallet, his heart hammering against his ribs. He does not take a spare habit or a piece of bread from the kitchens. That would be theft from the community, a final sin he cannot bring himself to commit. He owns nothing, and so he will leave with nothing. He slips on his hard leather sandals. The sound seems deafening in the stillness. He pulls the cowl of his habit up over his head, a gesture that once felt like an embrace but now feels like a shroud. He glides like a shadow out of the dormitory, through the moon-drenched cloister, his bare feet cold on the ancient stones. He knows of a small postern gate in the outer wall, one used by the gardeners, that is often barred but not always locked. His hands tremble as he lifts the heavy wooden bar. It makes a groaning sound that echoes in the silence. He freezes, listening, but no one stirs. He slips through the opening and pulls the gate shut behind him. And then he is outside. The night air is cool and smells of damp earth and wild things. The sounds of the world, sounds he has not truly heard for years, rush in on him. The chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of the wind in the tall grass. It is both terrifying and intoxicating. He has no idea where he is going. He simply picks a direction, away from the looming silhouette of the abbey, and he begins to walk. In the morning, his absence is noted. His pallet is empty. His place in the choir is vacant. A quiet search is made. When he is not found, a heavy sadness settles over the brothers. The abbot will say a prayer for a lost sheep, and then life within the walls will continue on its prescribed course. But the story of the man who left will remain. You don't need to remember the term, but Saint Benedict, in his rule, had a name for men like this. He called them gyrovagues, literally, those who wander in circles. He considered them the most disgraceful and unstable kind of monk, slaves to their own wills and appetites, drifting from one monastery to another, always seeking comfort and never finding stability. The life of the gyrovague is one of profound hardship and insecurity. The monastic habit that was his uniform and his protection inside the walls is now a mark of shame. To the villagers he passes, he is an outcast, a man who has broken a sacred vow. He is an object of pity, but also of suspicion. He has no money and no skills to survive in the secular world. He has forgotten how to bargain, how to trade, how to live as an individual. His days become a cycle of walking and begging. He might approach a farmhouse at dusk and, trading on his former status, offer a prayer or a blessing in exchange for a crust of bread or a place to sleep in a barn. He learns the humility of true poverty, a poverty not chosen and structured, but chaotic and desperate. Sometimes he will seek refuge at another monastery. He will appear at their gate, a weary, travel-stained figure. Out of Christian charity, the abbot may offer him a meal and a bed for a night or two. He will sit in their refectory, a guest among brothers, and for a moment he will feel the comfort of the life he abandoned. But he cannot stay. They will not take in another abbey's failure. They will give him a loaf of bread for the journey, and in the morning they will show him the gate. And he will begin walking once more. Let the thought of his endless journey soothe you into stillness. Let his weariness add to your own desire for rest. His journey is long and uncertain, but yours is coming to a quiet close in the comfort and safety of your bed. The harshest secret that the Gyrovag reveals is not one of corruption or abuse within the monastery, but the simple, stark fact that the monastic life, even when lived with the purest of intentions, could break a man. His existence is living proof of the immense difficulty of what the monks were trying to achieve. He is the embodiment of failure, a constant, walking reminder to every monk that the path they have chosen is fraught with spiritual peril, and that the enemy is not always outside the walls, but deep within their own hearts. And as this lonely figure of the wandering monk disappears over the horizon, we are left with a question. What was the final weight that broke him? It was often not a single event, but a slow, creeping sickness of the soul. An enemy that did not attack with sound or fury, but with a profound and heavy quiet. The Desert Fathers had a name for it. They called it Aestia, the noonday demon. And as this lonely figure of the wandering monk disappears over the horizon, we are left with a question. What was the final weight that broke him? It was often not a single event, but a slow, creeping sickness of the soul. An enemy that did not attack with sound or fury, but with a profound and heavy quiet. The Desert Fathers, the first Christian monks who lived in the wastes of Egypt, had a name for it. They called it Aestia, and they knew it as the noonday demon. Imagine the day has reached its midpoint. The sun is high and hot. The fervor of the morning's prayers has faded. The main meal has been eaten, and the satisfying ache of morning labor has given way to a deep, unshakable weariness. The end of the day, with its promise of rest, is still many hours away. It is in this stagnant, quiet, sun-drenched moment that the demon of Aestia comes to call. It does not arrive with a thunderclap. It arrives as a sigh. It is a heaviness that settles first in your limbs, and then in your soul. You are in the scriptorium, the quill resting in your hand, but the words on the page seem to swim before your eyes. They feel meaningless, a foolish scratching of ink on skin. You look at the brother beside you, and the sound of his quiet breathing, once a comforting presence, now seems intensely irritating. Your cell, which you once saw as a haven of peaceful contemplation, suddenly feels like a cramped and suffocating prison. A profound restlessness takes hold. You have a desperate urge to be anywhere but here. You find yourself constantly glancing up at the sun, trying to measure the slow, agonizing passage of time. You get up from your stool, thinking you will get a drink of water, but you are simply moving for the sake of moving. You gaze out of the narrow window, and your mind drifts to the world outside the walls. You imagine yourself a traveler on the road, a sailor on a ship, anyone, anywhere, doing anything else. The life you have chosen feels like a terrible mistake. This is Aestia. It is not simple boredom, nor is it laziness as we understand it. It is a deep and corrosive spiritual weariness, a disgust with the duties of the consecrated life. It is an exhaustion of the soul that drains the world of all its meaning and all of its color. And with it comes a deep, isolating sadness. Prayer feels impossible. The words feel like stones in your mouth, and you are convinced that God has turned his face from you, that your entire life in this place has been a waste. Let the feeling of this stillness settle over you, but let it be a peaceful stillness. For the monk, it was a torment. For you, it is simply a quiet moment on the path to sleep. The harshest secret of Asteia was not the feeling itself, but how it was viewed. This was not seen as a psychological condition, as we might see depression today. It was considered a grave and dangerous sin. It was a direct temptation from a demon, an assault on the soul. To give in to it, to allow the listlessness and resentment to take root, was to actively reject the grace of God. The Desert Fathers called it the most troublesome of all the temptations, because it attacked the very foundation of a monk's vocation. It was the mother of other sins. A monk afflicted with Asteia could easily fall into anger, lashing out at his brothers. He could fall into despair, believing he was damned. And as we have seen, he could fall into flight, abandoning his vows and his community altogether. Because it was a sin, it was a source of profound shame. To admit to the abbot that you were suffering from Asteia was to admit that your faith was failing, that you were losing a crucial spiritual battle. Many suffered in silence, trying to hide the spiritual emptiness that was consuming them from within. But the elders of the monastery knew this enemy well, and they had strategies for the war against it. The first and most important weapon was work. The abbot would not counsel a suffering monk to rest. Instead, he might assign him a new, demanding physical task. The simple, repetitive rhythm of chopping wood, or digging a ditch, or weeding a long row of vegetables, could sometimes pull the mind out of its inward-turning, destructive spiral. By forcing the body into action, the soul could sometimes be shaken from its slumber. Another remedy was prayer, even when it felt hollow. Monks were taught to force themselves through the Psalms, to remain on their knees even when they felt nothing. It was an act of pure will, a refusal to surrender. Sometimes during these forced prayers, a grace would be given. Tears might come, and this was seen as a great gift. The tears were believed to soften a heart that had grown hard and dry, allowing God's love to seep back in. And finally, the ultimate cure was perseverance. The vow of stability. The promise to remain in one's chosen monastery for life was a direct counterattack against the restless urge to flee that Asteia always inspired. The elders would counsel the afflicted brother to simply stay in his cell, to endure the darkness, to ride out the storm, trusting that it would eventually pass, as all storms do. The battle was won not by a dramatic victory, but by a quiet, stubborn refusal to be moved. It was a test of faith in its purest form. To continue to believe in the light, even when you are surrounded by an impenetrable darkness. And this internal demon of Asteia rarely stayed contained within a single soul. Its poison, the feelings of irritation and resentment it fostered, would inevitably seep out. A man afflicted with this spiritual weariness might look upon his brother not with charity, but with annoyance. A perceived slight, a minor infraction, could balloon into a silent, bitter conflict, creating a different kind of hidden struggle within the supposedly peaceful community. And this internal demon of Asteia rarely stayed contained within a single soul. Its poison, the feelings of irritation and resentment it fostered, would inevitably seep out. A man afflicted with this spiritual weariness might look upon his brother not with charity, but with annoyance. A perceived slight, a minor infraction, could balloon into a silent, bitter conflict, creating a different kind of hidden struggle within the supposedly peaceful community. The ideal of the monastery is one of perfect, harmonious love. Caritas, brotherly charity. The reality is that the monastery is a collection of human beings, living in incredibly close quarters for their entire lives. And where there are human beings, there is friction. In the outside world, if you have a disagreement with a neighbor, you can retreat to your own home. You can avoid them for a few days until the anger cools. But here, in the enclosed world of the abbey, there is no escape. The brother who irritates you is everywhere. He kneels beside you in the choir, his voice slightly off-key in the chant. He sits across from you in the silent refectory, and the way he scrapes his spoon against his bowl grates on your nerves. He works with you in the garden, and you feel he is not doing his fair share of the labor. Every small annoyance, every minor flaw, is magnified 100 times by the sheer, inescapable proximity of the life. The great silence, meant to foster peace, can have the opposite effect when conflict arises. A simple misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a single sentence, "I am sorry, I did not mean to take your place," is left to fester. Without words, the mind is free to invent its own narratives, to assign the worst possible motives to the other person's actions. Did he take your usual seat in the scriptorium on purpose, as a deliberate slight? Did he fail to pass you the pruning knife as a sign of his contempt? Your mind can spin these small events into a grand story of persecution and disrespect. And so a silent war begins. It is a war fought not with fists or sharp words, but with 1,000 tiny, almost invisible gestures of passive aggression. You might turn your back just a little too quickly when he approaches. You might refuse to catch his eye during the daily chapter meeting. When passing the communal loaf of bread at the table, you might ensure the piece he receives is the smallest, stalest end. An outsider would notice nothing at all. But in the hyper-observant world of the monastery, these small acts are as clear as a declaration of war. Every other brother sees it. They feel the coldness, the tension in the air when the two of you are near. Let the quiet of their conflict bring peace to your own mind. It is a distant storm, its sound muffled by the centuries. It requires none of your energy. Just observe it and let it pass by. The elders called the spreading of this conflict murmuring. It was considered a deadly sin, a cancer that could destroy the unity and peace of the entire house. It begins when you can no longer contain your resentment. You find a moment with a third brother, perhaps while mending tools in the workshop, and you whisper your complaint. You tell him how Brother John is lazy or proud or inconsiderate. You frame it as a simple observation, but your true purpose is to win an ally, to justify your own anger. Now the poison has spread. The third brother may look at Brother John with a newly critical eye. Factions can begin to form. The harmony of the whole community is threatened by a private grievance. The harshest secret of these quarrels is the devastating toll they take on a monk's spiritual life. The very purpose of his existence here is to find peace with God. But how can your heart be open to God when it is closed and hard with bitterness toward the brother kneeling 2 feet away from you? How can you pray for forgiveness for your own sins when you are nursing a grudge for a perceived sin against you? The anger becomes a wall between you and God. Your prayers feel empty. Your work feels like a joyless chore. The presence of your rival becomes a constant, grinding distraction, pulling your mind away from contemplation and into a petty cycle of resentment and self-pity. This internal spiritual sickness, born of a simple quarrel, can be more damaging to the soul than any physical hardship, more draining than any fast. It reveals the profound difficulty of the simplest Christian command, to love your neighbor as yourself. The rule of Saint Benedict provides ways to resolve these conflicts. The first step lies with you. You are commanded to go to your brother and ask for forgiveness, even if you believe you are the one who has been wronged. This is an act of supreme humility, a crushing of your own pride. If that fails, the abbot, as the father of the community, will intervene. He will call you both to his study, listen to each side, and act as judge and mediator. His goal is not to decide a winner and a loser, but to restore peace. He will command you both to let go of your anger and reconcile. The ultimate test comes during the Mass, in the ritual known as the Kiss of Peace. Before communion, the monks offer each other a sign of peace, a slight bow, or a grasp of the shoulders. When you turn to the brother with whom you have been quarreling, you face a moment of spiritual crisis. To refuse the gesture is an open, public act of defiance against the abbot and against God. To accept it, but with a heart still full of anger, is a lie, a hypocrisy that soils the sacrament. The only true path is to use that moment to genuinely let go, to forgive. In that simple, ritualized gesture, You are meant to heal the wound and restore the broken bonds of charity. It is a beautiful ideal, but for a human heart clinging to its own sense of justice, it is one of the hardest things a monk is ever asked to do. And while these quiet battles of the heart were fought between the monks of the choir, another, more silent division ran through the heart of the abbey. It was a line drawn between those who could read and those who could not, between those who spent their days in prayer and study, and another group of brothers, whose hands were permanently calloused and whose work ever truly ended. And while these quiet battles of the heart were fought between the monks of the choir, another, more silent division ran through the heart of the abbey. It was a line drawn between those who could read and those who could not, between those who spent their days in prayer and study, and another group of brothers, whose hands were permanently calloused and whose work never truly ended. These were the conversi, the lay brothers. Let's turn our attention now to the quiet men, who often seem to be in the background of the monastic story. They are a constant presence, yet easily overlooked. You see them driving the oxen in the fields at dawn, their broad shoulders stooped to the plow. You hear the rhythmic clang of a hammer from the forge, and no one of them is there, his face slick with sweat in the firelight, mending the abbey's tools. They are the millers, the brewers, the shepherds, the tanners. They are the backbone of the abbey, the strong hands that perform the relentless manual labor required to keep this small, self-sufficient world turning. These men are monks. They have taken the same sacred vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But their life is entirely different from the life of a choir monk like yourself. The lay brotherhood was born out of a practical need. As the great monasteries grew, accumulating vast tracts of land, the amount of work became too much for the choir monks to handle alone. Their primary duty, their opus dei or work of God, was the 8 daily services of prayer and chant in the chapel. This sacred work could not be neglected. And so a new class of monk was created. The lay brothers were often drawn from the local peasantry. They were pious, hard-working men who sought a life dedicated to God, but lacked the education to become choir monks. They were illiterate. They could not read the Latin of the Psalms or the writings of the Church Fathers. And this single fact defined their existence and set them permanently apart. While you spend hours in the scriptorium or the library, a lay brother spends his entire day in the fields or the workshops. His work is not a portion of his day. It is the whole of it. His prayer is not the chanted liturgy, but the swing of his axe, the sweat of his brow. He is taught that his labor is a holy offering, as pleasing to God as any psalm sung in the chapel. Let your mind feel the simple peace of a day spent in hard, useful work. Let the rhythmic sounds of their labor, the steady turning of a millstone, the gentle bleating of sheep, be a lullaby. Because they could not read, their form of prayer was different. While you and the other choir monks gather in the ornate stalls of the chapel for the divine office, the lay brothers would stand in the back, in the shadows of the nave. Unable to follow the Latin texts, they were given a simpler devotion. They might be assigned to recite the Pater Noster, the Our Father, 150 times a day, to mirror the 150 Psalms. They would keep count by using a string of beads, a precursor to the rosary, letting each bead slip through their rough, work-worn fingers as they murmured the simple, powerful prayer. This division carried through every aspect of their lives. They often had their own separate dormitory, plainer and more crowded than your own. They might even eat in a separate refectory, or at different tables. Their habit, their monastic robe, was often a slightly different color or made of a rougher, undyed wool, a constant visual reminder of their distinct status. They were brothers in Christ, but they were not your equals. And here lies the harsh, unspoken secret of this system. The monastery, which was meant to be a refuge from the injustices of the feudal world, had perfectly recreated its rigid class structure within its own holy walls. The line between a choir monk, often from a higher social class, and a lay brother from the peasantry, was absolute. A lay brother could never learn to read and cross over to become a choir monk. He was locked into his station for life. You don't need to hold on to this thought, but let it drift gently by. To the people of the time, this was not necessarily seen as an injustice. It was the natural order of things. Society was seen as a body, with each part having a different but essential function. The choir monks were the soul, dedicated to prayer. The lay brothers were the hands, dedicated to labor. Each was seen as serving God in the way that was best suited to his abilities and his station in life. The relationship between the two groups was complex. There was a deep and necessary interdependence. You relied on the lay brothers for the very food you ate, for the roof over your head, for the sandals on your feet. And they relied on you for the prayers they could not read, for the sacraments, for the spiritual guidance of the abbot. This could foster a sense of mutual, paternalistic respect. But it is easy to imagine that it also bred a quiet condescension from the educated monks, and perhaps a hidden resentment from the lay brothers, who performed the hardest work but held the lowest status. They were the silent, tireless gears in the great machine of the abbey, essential but unseen, their individual stories lost to the historical record. And it was the tireless work of these lay brothers, the endless cycle of planting and harvesting, milling and smithing, that formed the economic engine of the great abbeys. Their labor generated immense wealth. And wealth, accumulating over centuries, could become a subtle poison. A temptation that could slowly erode the very foundations of the monastic ideal, causing the harsh vows taken in a cold stone chapel to slowly, almost imperceptibly, decay. And it was the tireless work of these lay brothers, the endless cycle of planting and harvesting, milling and smithing, that formed the economic engine of the great abbeys. Their labor generated immense wealth. And wealth, accumulating over centuries, could become a subtle poison. A temptation that could slowly erode the very foundations of the monastic ideal, causing the harsh vows taken in a cold stone chapel to slowly, almost imperceptibly, decay. Let your mind drift now, not to a single moment, but down through the slow, deep river of the centuries. The Abbey of St. Jude, in your time as a novice, is a place of sincere austerity. But imagine it 200 years later. Then 300. Generations of monks have lived and died within its walls. The world outside has changed, and so has the world within, in ways so gradual they were hardly noticed by those who lived through them. The change was as slow and quiet as the growth of moss on a stone wall, or the wearing away of a stone step by the passage of 1,000 feet. The wealth came from many sources. For centuries, pious noblemen and wealthy merchants, fearing for the state of their souls, would donate vast tracts of land or chests of silver to the abbey. They saw it as a sacred investment, buying for themselves and their families an army of holy men who would pray for them long after they were gone. The abbey's own lands, managed with the organized, efficient labor of the lay brothers, became some of the most productive farms in the entire kingdom. And unlike secular lords, the abbey often paid little to no tax, allowing its treasury to swell year after year. At first, this wealth was used for God's glory. A new, higher bell tower was built. The simple chapel was expanded, with soaring vaulted ceilings and windows of colored glass that bathed the stone in jewels of light. The library was filled with more precious books. But slowly, inevitably, the comfort that wealth could provide began to seep into the life of the community. The vow of poverty was the first to soften. An individual monk like yourself still owned nothing. But the community, the corporate body of the monastery, became a wealthy landlord. And that corporate wealth began to translate into a more comfortable existence for its members. The simple, watery pottage of your time might, 2 centuries later, be thickened with cream and flavored with expensive spices brought by Venetian merchants from the Far East. The hard, dark bread might be replaced by loaves made from fine white wheat. The cellar, once filled with weak ale, might now hold barrels of fine wine from the vineyards of France. The sin of gluttony, once a battle fought against the memory of a simple roasted apple, now became a much more complicated foe. Let your mind relax. You don't need to judge them, only understand the slow, human path they followed. Each change seemed reasonable. Each comfort a small mercy. The harsh, open dormitory, where you slept on a straw pallet, might, in a later century, be partitioned off. First with woolen curtains, and then with wooden walls, creating small, private cells for each monk. The straw pallet might be replaced by a mattress stuffed with soft feathers. The coarse, scratchy wool of the monastic habit might be replaced by a finer, softer weave that did not chafe the skin. The vow of hardship, of sharing in the physical suffering of the poor, was slowly being traded for the quiet pursuit of peace without pain. And with this comfort came a change in the attitude toward labor. The choir monks, now more educated and often from higher social classes, began to see manual work in the fields as beneath their dignity. That was the work of the lay brothers and a growing staff of hired servants. The choir monk's day became one of prayer, study, reading, and contemplation. It was a life of dignified, scholarly leisure, a world away from the ora et labora, pray and work, that Saint Benedict had envisioned. The calluses on their hands faded, and their connection to the earth and the seasons grew distant. The harshest secret of this slow decay was the profound betrayal of the original ideal. The entire purpose of the harsh, disciplined life was to wage a war against the comforts of the flesh, to tame the body, and to find God in a state of humble simplicity. By removing the hardship, the very meaning of the life was being hollowed out, leaving behind a beautiful, comfortable, but spiritually empty shell. In the wealthiest of these later abbeys, the abbot was no longer a simple spiritual father. He was a great feudal lord. He lived in a separate house, a palace within the monastery walls, with his own private kitchen and a host of servants. He would entertain other great lords and bishops. With lavish feasts, his table set with silver plates and goblets. He was a player in the great game of national politics. He had lost the simple connection to his brothers, the men whose souls he was supposed to be caring for. This was the reality that fueled the bitter accusations from the outside world. When the struggling peasant looked at the high walls of the abbey, he was not always wrong to imagine a life of ease and plenty within. The stereotype of the fat, worldly monk was a caricature, but it was a caricature based on a kernel of truth found in these wealthy, comfortable, later monasteries. The fire of devotion that had burned so brightly in the early centuries had, in some places, cooled to a gentle, pleasant warmth, a comfortable tradition rather than a desperate, daily quest for God in the face of hardship. The salt had, in some ways, lost its savor. And into this world of softened vows and comfortable routine, a world that tried to keep the outside at bay, the outside would inevitably arrive. A knock would come at the great gatehouse. A nobleman seeking shelter for the night, a wealthy merchant on a pilgrimage, or a messenger from the king. The arrival of a visitor was always a disruption, a breath of foreign air that carried with it the scent of news, of politics, and of the very worldly temptations the monks had sworn to renounce. And into this world of softened vows and comfortable routine, a world that tried to keep the outside at bay, the outside would inevitably arrive. A knock would come at the great gatehouse, a loud, insistent sound that would break the gentle, rhythmic spell of the monastic day. It might be a nobleman seeking shelter for the night, a wealthy merchant on a pilgrimage, or a messenger from the king. The arrival of a visitor was always a disruption, a breath of foreign air that carried with it the scent of news, of politics, and of the very worldly temptations the monks had sworn to renounce. The rule of Saint Benedict was very clear on this point. Hospitality was a sacred duty. All guests who came to the monastery were to be welcomed as if they were Christ himself. This created a permanent tension at the heart of the community. The need to be a closed, contemplative fortress of silence, and the simultaneous command to be an open, welcoming house of charity. The gatekeeper would alert the guest master, the monk specifically appointed to this holy task. It was his job to greet the travelers, to see to their needs, and to act as a gentle but firm barrier between their world and the cloistered world of his brothers. He would lead the visitors not into the main cloister, but to the guest house, a separate building with its own hall, kitchen, and sleeping quarters. Here they would be cared for. Let the noise of their arrival be a distant murmur, a story from long ago that does not need to disturb your rest. The world knocks at the door, but you can remain still and at peace. If the visitor was a great lord traveling with his retinue, the disruption would be immense. The quiet courtyard of the guest house would suddenly be filled with the sounds of armored men, the stamping of heavy war horses, the barking of hunting dogs, and the loud, confident laughter of people unaccustomed to the discipline of silence. While the monks ate their meager pottage in the refectory, the smells of roasting meat and spiced wine would drift from the guest house kitchen, a stark and tempting reminder of the world of feasts and plenty. For a monk like yourself, who may have come from a noble family, the presence of this lord was a powerful test. You might hear the talk among his soldiers of a recent battle, or of a great tournament planned for the summer. And for a moment, your mind is no longer in the chapel. It is on the back of a horse, a lance in your hand, feeling the thrill of a life you deliberately chose to leave behind. You might recognize the coat of arms on the Lord's banner as belonging to a neighboring family, a rival of your own, and an old, worldly feeling of pride or anger might stir in your heart. The visitor, without speaking a single word to you, has forced you to confront the ghost of the man you used to be. Perhaps the visitor is not a lord, but a wealthy wool merchant on his way to London or on a pilgrimage to a distant shrine. He does not bring the noise of soldiers, but he brings a different kind of worldliness. He speaks of prices, of profits, of dangerous sea voyages, of the latest fashions in Florence. His clothes are made of fine velvet, dyed a deep and costly blue, and a heavy gold ring adorns his finger. He speaks of a world of ambition, of risk, of buying and selling, a world that runs on the very money you have vowed to renounce. His presence makes the simple, unchanging rhythm of your monastic life seem small and provincial. It is a temptation not to pride of arms, but to pride of possession and experience. But perhaps the most difficult visit of all is the quiet arrival of a family member. Your brother, who now runs the family estate, or your mother, her face etched with a worry for you that has not faded with the years. The meeting takes place in the parlor, under the watchful eye of the guest master. The conversation is stilted. They bring you news from home, a marriage, a birth, a death. They tell you of people you once loved, of a life that was once yours. And this is the sharpest test of all. The vow of chastity was not just about foregoing marriage, but about reordering your love, directing it all toward God and your monastic community. The vow of poverty was not just about renouncing possessions, but renouncing the inheritance and the name your family represents. This visit, full of love and quiet sadness, pulls at those old, deep roots that you have tried so hard to sever. The harshest secret of these visits is that every single one was a spiritual trial. The monks were trained to see Christ in the face of the guest, but they also knew that the guest, however unintentionally, was a vessel of temptation. The news they brought, the clothes they wore, the food they ate, the stories they told, all of it was a reminder of the world, a test of the vows. The visitor might stay for a day or 2 or 3. And for that time, the abbey's hard-won peace was disturbed. The carefully constructed silence was filled with the echoes of another life. And after the visit was over, the true work began. The Lord and his soldiers would ride away, the merchant would continue on his journey, your mother would return to her distant home. But the thoughts and feelings they stirred up would remain. A seed of dissatisfaction, of regret, of worldly desire, might have been planted in your heart. It would take days or even weeks of prayer and renewed discipline to weed it out, to quiet the echoes of the world, and to find your way back to the simple, focused peace that is the sole treasure you seek. And after a few days, the visitor would depart. The noise of his retinue would fade, the scent of his worldly life would dissipate, and the abbey would settle back into its quiet, timeless rhythm. The disruptions of the world were temporary. But there was another kind of departure, a final one, that every monk had to face. It was not a journey out the main gate and back to the world, but a quiet passage from his cell to the infirmary, and then to the small cemetery beyond the chapel wall. It was the last great test of his faith. And after a few days, the visitor would depart. The noise of his retinue would fade, the scent of his worldly life would dissipate, and the abbey would settle back into its quiet, timeless rhythm. The disruptions of the world were temporary. But there was another kind of departure, a final one, that every monk had to face. It was not a journey out the main gate and back to the world, but a quiet passage from his cell to the infirmary, and then to the small cemetery beyond the chapel wall. It was the last great test of his faith, the fulfillment of his final unspoken vow. The journey begins not with a sudden event, but with a slow, gentle fading. An old brother, perhaps one who has lived within these walls for 60 years, feels a familiar weariness that no amount of sleep can cure. His steps in the cloister grow slower. His voice in the choir, once strong, is now a thin whisper. He knows, and his brothers know, that his time is coming. He is led one last time to the infirmary, not with the hope of a cure, but with the quiet acceptance of his final season. A central part of the monastic life was the practice of memento mori. Remember, you will die. The rule of Saint Benedict commands the monk to keep death daily before your eyes. This was not meant to be a morbid or fearful practice. It was a tool for perspective. The constant awareness of death's certainty was meant to strip away the petty vanities and anxieties of daily life. If life is short and eternity is long, then the small struggles of the day lose their power. The purpose of life was not life itself, but the preparation of the soul for what was to come. For the old monk lying in the infirmary, this is not a time for fear, but a time of quiet anticipation. He has been practicing for this moment his entire life. Let the peace of his passing settle over you. His struggle is over, and yours will be soon in sleep. As his strength wanes, the community gathers around him. This is not a private, lonely death. It is a communal journey. The abbot will come to hear his final confession and administer the last rites, anointing his forehead with holy oil. The brothers will keep a constant vigil by his bedside, praying the psalms in soft, low voices, ensuring that the sound of prayer is the last sound he hears on this earth. They are a spiritual escort, shepherding his soul to the very threshold of the next world. Let us drift away now from the inner life of the soul, from the silent prayers in the chapel and the quiet contemplation in the cloister garden. Let us float just beyond the sacred walls of the abbey, to the world of fields, of tenants, of rent, and of great and heavy responsibility. For the monastery, which we imagine as a haven of otherworldly peace, was also something else. It was a great and powerful landowner, an earthly estate dedicated to the glory of God. As you continue to relax, as your breathing deepens and your body settles into a profound stillness, let us explore this quiet, hidden secret. The secret is not one of sin or corruption, but one of immense worldly complexity. While each monk within the walls had taken a vow of poverty, owning nothing but the simple robe on his back, the abbey itself, as an institution, often became immensely wealthy, powerful, and deeply entangled in the business of the world. There is no need to grasp the details of this. Just let the story of these quiet, earthly duties be a gentle weight, helping you to sink further and further into peaceful rest. Imagine a small, quiet chamber within the monastery, not far from the abbot's own quarters. This is the cell of the bursar, the monk entrusted with managing the abbey's finances. The room is simple, with a stone floor, a single narrow window looking out onto a kitchen garden, and a heavy wooden desk. The air in the room smells of old wood, of ink, of beeswax from the candles, and of the faint, clean scent of aging parchment. The bursar is a man chosen not for his holiness alone, but for his keen mind, his steady hand, and his talent for numbers. His life is also a prayer, but his prayer is one of order, of balance, of meticulous record-keeping. Before him on the desk lies the abbey's great ledger. This book is a treasure in its own right. It is huge and heavy, bound in thick leather and clasped with brass. To open it is to release the faint, sweet, dusty smell of its pages. These pages are not made of paper, but of vellum, the skin of a calf, scraped and treated until it is a smooth, creamy, and incredibly durable surface for writing. The vellum is thick and cool to the touch. Faint, straight lines have been ruled upon it, a guide for the bursar's hand. Let us watch him as he works. His movements are slow and deliberate. He takes his quill, a feather from a goose, its tip sharpened to a fine point, and dips it into a small pot of ink. The ink is made from oak galls and iron salts, a deep and permanent black. With a steady hand, he begins to write. The only sound in the room is the faint, dry scratch of the quill's nib moving across the surface of the vellum. It is a quiet, rhythmic, and deeply calming sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. A sound of order being created from the chaos of the world. What does he write? He is not writing scripture or philosophy. He is writing the slow, mundane story of the abbey's earthly life. You can let these details drift in your mind, like words on a forgotten page. Item from the tenant at Northfield, 5 bushels of barley for the autumn rent. Item from the widow at the crossroads, 2 chickens for the use of the abbey's mill. Item, 2 silver pennies received from the sale of surplus cheese at the town market. Item, 1 cartload of firewood, cut from the abbey's own woods by the lay brothers. Over and over, the entries fill the page. Each one a tiny testament to the vast and complex economic engine of the monastery. This great ledger was the abbey's secret heart, a map of its wealth and its reach. The bursar's work was tied to the slow, steady turning of the seasons. In the spring, he would record the number of newborn lambs in the abbey's flocks, a source of immense wealth from their wool. He would note the collection of eggs from the tenants and the purchase of new seeds for the planting season. In the summer, the great wool clip would take place. The lay brothers would spend weeks shearing the abbey's thousands of sheep. The bursar would oversee the weighing of the great sacks of wool, their earthy scent filling the air. He would negotiate with merchants from Flanders or Italy, his quiet voice sealing a deal that would fund the abbey's work for another year. He would record the transaction with the same patient care as he would record a prayer. In the autumn, after the harvest, the great tithe barn would be opened. This was a building as vast and as sacred as a church, its great wooden doors swinging open to receive the abbey's share. Imagine the scene. A long line of tenants, their wooden carts piled high with sheaves of golden wheat, with barrels of apples, with sacks of oats. One by one, they would come forward, and the bursar or his assistant would be there, making a mark in a wax tablet or a note on a scrap of parchment. 1/10 of all that the land produced belonged to the abbey. It was a divine tax, a rental payment to God for the use of his earth. It was a slow, peaceful, and orderly procession, the culmination of a year of hard labor. And in the winter, the bursar would oversee the abbey's stores, ensuring there was enough salted meat, dried beans, and preserved vegetables to last the community through the cold, lean months. He would manage the abbey's charity, distributing bread and soup to the poor who came to the monastery gates for help. All this wealth, all this responsibility, presented a quiet and profound spiritual challenge. How could a man who had sworn a personal vow of poverty, who owned not even the sandals on his feet, be the manager of such a vast estate? This was the harsh, hidden secret of the abbey's administration. The bursar, and the abbot himself, had to walk a fine line between the worldly and the divine. They had to be shrewd negotiators and careful accountants, while at the same time remaining humble monks. Imagine the bursar, at the end of a long day of counting and recording, pausing in his work. He looks away from the columns of numbers and lets his gaze rest on the simple wooden crucifix hanging on the wall of his cell. In that quiet moment, he would be reminded that all this wealth, the land, the wool, the grain, was not for his own gain. It did not belong to him. It belonged to God. He was merely its steward, its caretaker. The profits from the farms and the markets would be used to maintain the abbey, to feed the monks, to care for the sick in the infirmary, to give alms to the poor, and most importantly, to commission the beautiful illuminated manuscripts and golden chalices that were used to glorify God. It was a heavy burden, to touch so much worldly wealth while keeping one's own soul pure and simple. And as you lie here, on the edge of sleep, you can let go of this burden. Let go of the counting, the accounting, the quiet weight of responsibility. Think only of the slow, steady rhythm of the seasons. The planting in the spring, the growing in the summer, the harvest in the fall, and the quiet rest of the winter. It is a natural, peaceful cycle. A cycle that has turned for thousands of years. Let that ancient rhythm soothe your mind and body now, pulling you down into a deep, comfortable, and restorative sleep. And as the abbey managed the great wealth of the land, it also stood as a silent guardian over another, even greater, and far more secret treasure: the wealth of the written word, kept under heavy lock and key. Let us now leave the open fields and the dusty ledger books of the world behind. Let us pull the great, heavy oak door of the cloister shut, and enter the deep, silent heart of the abbey, a place of shadow, of dust, of the faint, sweet smell of aging parchment. We are entering the library. There is a different kind of quiet here. It is not the simple absence of noise, but a quiet that feels ancient, heavy, and profound. It is a silence built from centuries of unspoken prayers, of focused thought, of reverence for the written word. As you settle deeper into your bed, you can let this profound sense of quiet fill your own mind, calming any lingering thoughts, and guiding you into a state of deep, untroubled peace. Imagine the room. It is a long, narrow chamber with a high, vaulted ceiling. The only light comes from a series of tall, thin windows, glazed not with clear glass, but with small, uneven panes that soften the sunlight, diffusing it into gentle, hazy beams. These beams of light slice through the still, cool air, and in them, you can see a million tiny dust motes dancing a slow, silent, endless waltz. The air itself feels different here. It carries the unique scent of 1,000 years of knowledge. The dry, slightly sweet smell of vellum, the rich, earthy scent of leather bindings, the faint, sharp tang of dried ink, and the comforting aroma of beeswax used to polish the wooden shelves. The library is not filled with tables and chairs. Instead, it is lined with great wooden presses, the medieval word for bookcases. These are not open shelves, but heavy, dark, oaken structures, reaching high towards the ceiling. And upon these shelves, the books lie waiting. But the books are not arranged as we might expect. They are not standing upright, spine out. Most are lying flat on the shelves, and many of them are chained. This is perhaps the most striking feature of this silent room. From the binding of each heavy volume, a long, iron chain is attached. The other end of the chain is tethered to an iron rod that runs the length of the shelf. Let this image settle in your mind. It is not a menacing one. The chains are not here to imprison the books, but to protect them. Each book in this room is a priceless, irreplaceable treasure. It is not a printed object, but a work of art, a creation that took a single monk, or a team of monks, months or even years of painstaking labor to produce. The vellum for its pages came from dozens of animal skins. The ink was mixed by hand. The words were written one letter at a time with a sharpened quill. And the illustrations were painted with ground-up minerals and gemstones. To lose such a book would be to lose a piece of the abbey's soul. And so the chains keep them safe. They allow a monk to lift a book from the shelf and place it on the built-in wooden lectern below, but they prevent the book from ever leaving its designated place. Imagine a monk, his shoulders draped in his dark wool habit, moving silently through the library. He comes to one of the presses and selects a volume. He lifts it carefully. It is as heavy as a stone tablet, and the iron chain makes a soft, low, clinking sound as it slides along the rod. It is a quiet, metallic whisper in the deep silence, the sound of knowledge being accessed. He rests the book on the angled lectern and opens its heavy, leather-bound cover. Let us think of the books he is permitted to read, the holy and essential texts that form the foundation of his world. There is the Great Bible, a book so massive it takes 2 hands to open, its vellum pages thick and creamy. The first letter of each chapter is a masterpiece of illumination, a great, intricate I or P painted in brilliant colors and decorated with shimmering gold leaf that catches the light like a trapped sunbeam. There are the Psalters, the books of Psalms, with their prayers written out alongside musical notation. The monk might run his finger along the page, his lips moving silently, not reading the words but hearing the holy chant in his mind. There are the writings of the great church fathers, St. Augustine, St. Jerome, their complex theology filling page after page with dense, careful script. There are the lives of the saints, telling stories of piety, of martyrdom, of miracles. And there are the herbals, beautiful books filled with detailed, hand-painted illustrations of plants, each one labeled with its name and its medicinal properties. These were the sacred and practical texts, the bedrock of the monastery's spiritual and intellectual life. But now, let us drift to a darker, more secluded corner of the library. Here, there is one press that looks different from the others. Its doors are not open, but are made of solid, dark oak, and they are shut fast with a heavy iron lock. The librarian, a quiet, elderly monk with ink stains on his fingers, holds the only key. This is the armarium, the locked press, and inside it lies a different kind of knowledge. A kind of knowledge that is considered beautiful, powerful, and deeply dangerous. What is hidden within? What is the harsh secret that must be kept under lock and key? Inside this press are not the works of saints, but the works of the pagans, the great writers and thinkers of the classical world of ancient Rome. Imagine the librarian, perhaps late at night when the rest of the abbey is asleep, unlocking this press with a heavy iron key. The lock groans a tired, rusty sound in the stillness. He swings the heavy doors open, and a different scent emerges, the smell of even older vellum, of a world that existed long before this abbey was ever built. Inside, there are the works of Ovid, his pages filled with the passionate, chaotic, and all too human stories of the Roman gods and goddesses. There is the poetry of Virgil, his epic tale of the founding of Rome. There are the letters and speeches of Cicero, the great Roman orator, whose words are built not on faith, but on logic, rhetoric, and a fierce belief in the power of the human mind. There are treatises on philosophy, on architecture, on the science of a world that did not know the Christian God. To the medieval mind, these books were a profound and troubling dilemma. On one hand, they contained immense wisdom, beauty, and a mastery of language that the monks themselves admired and sought to emulate. The monks learned Latin by studying Cicero. They understood poetry by reading Virgil. These books were the foundation of their education. But on the other hand, they were dangerous. They told of a world filled with other gods. They celebrated human passion, earthly love, and personal ambition in a way that directly contradicted the monastic vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. They asked difficult questions. They presented a vision of the world governed by reason and fate, not by divine providence. To a young, impressionable novice, the beautiful, seductive power of these pagan stories could be a poison to the soul, a distraction from the simple, focused path to God. And so, they were locked away. Not to be destroyed, for the monks were, above all, preservers of knowledge, but to be controlled. Access was restricted. Only the abbot, the librarian, and the most senior trusted scholars were permitted to study these texts. The secret of the library was not that the monks were ignorant of the outside world. It was that they knew its power all too well, and they feared it. Think of the burden on the old librarian. He is the guardian of this forbidden knowledge. He loves these books for their beauty, for the echoes of the lost world they contain. He can appreciate the perfect rhythm of a line of poetry, the elegant structure of a philosophical argument. Yet he is also charged with protecting his brothers from the very ideas contained within the pages he so carefully preserves. He lives a life caught between two duties, the preservation of human knowledge and the salvation of the human soul. As you lie here, on the very edge of sleep, you can let this quiet conflict dissolve. There is no need to read the forbidden books. There is no need to feel the weight of the librarian's burden. Just let your mind rest in the deep, profound, and peaceful silence of the ancient library. Let the image of the chained books be a symbol of stillness, of things held safely in their proper place. Let the scent of old leather and dust and beeswax be a comforting, earthy aroma. The secrets are quiet now. The lock is turned. The key is safe. And all is still. But whether a monk's life was spent with a heavy ledger or a chained book, in the sunlit fields or in the dusty library, it always, inevitably, led to the same final destination, a quiet acceptance of the last and greatest vow. In the final hours, a profound and ancient ritual takes place. The dying monk is gently lifted from his infirmary bed and laid upon the cold stone floor, on a mat of rough sackcloth that has been sprinkled with ashes. It is a gesture of ultimate humility. He is returning to the dust from which he was made. He entered this world with nothing. He entered the monastery with nothing. And so he shall leave the world with nothing but his soul. Lying there, surrounded by the chanting of his brothers, he closes his eyes and makes the final surrender. He lets go of his body, his breath, his life, offering it back to the God who gave it to him. The harshest secret of the monastic life might be this: that death was not seen as a tragedy, but as a victory. It was the final, perfect fulfillment of the vows, the final act of obedience to God's will, the final renunciation of self, the final release from the long war against the flesh. For a man who had spent a lifetime trying to silence his own will, to crush his own ego, and to detach himself from the world, death was the ultimate liberation. It was not an end, but a beginning. It was the moment he had been striving for since the day he first walked through the abbey gate. After his last breath has been drawn, and a great peace settles in the room, the rituals continue. His brothers gently wash his body and clothe him one last time in his simple, woolen habit. There is no ornate coffin, no worldly display. He will be buried as he lived, as a humble monk of Saint Benedict. The funeral mass is held in the chapel. The service is a requiem, a solemn prayer for the rest of his soul. Then the brothers carry his body, simply wrapped in its habit, out to the small cemetery on the abbey grounds. The graves there are simple, often unmarked. There is no grand headstone carved with his name and his accomplishments. The individual man is gone. He has been subsumed into the eternal community of the faithful. His name will be inscribed in the abbey's necrology, the great book of the dead, and on the anniversary of his death, every year until the abbey itself is no more, his name will be read aloud and his soul will be prayed for. He is not forgotten, but his earthly identity has been completely and finally erased. He has achieved the perfect poverty, the perfect humility, the perfect anonymity he sought. And with that quiet return to the earth, the story of the monk is complete. From the first vow to the final breath, it was a life lived in pursuit of a single goal, the quiet of the soul. We have walked the cloisters with him, felt the chill of the dormitory, heard the silence, and understood the burdens. Now his story is over, and our journey for tonight is also coming to its gentle end. And with that quiet return to the earth, the story of the monk is complete. From the first vow to the final breath, it was a life lived in pursuit of a single goal, the quiet of the soul. We have walked the cloisters with him, felt the chill of the dormitory, heard the silence, and understood the burdens. Now his story is over, and our journey for tonight is also coming to its gentle end. Tonight we've traveled far and wide, not across oceans or mountains, but through the quiet corridors of a time long past. We have felt the chill of the stone walls, listened to the profound weight of the great silence, and understood the heavy peace that came from a life of surrender. We've seen the harsh secrets hidden beneath the simple vows, the loneliness, the doubt, the endless, quiet struggle of the human spirit reaching for something divine. But these stories are not yours to carry any longer. Let them dissolve now, like mist in the morning sun. Let the figures of the monks fade back into the pages of history. As your mind continues to float gently through time, feel it drifting away from the 12th century and returning softly to the here and now. Feel the gentle weight of your own blankets, the softness of your pillow. There is no cold stone floor here, no scratchy straw pallet. There is only warmth, comfort, and a deep, profound safety. You are at peace. Your only work now is to rest. The history is sleeping. The story is finished. And now it's time for you to sleep. There is nothing left to do. Nothing left to learn. Nothing at all but to let go. Allow the gentle tide to carry you out into a deep and dreamless ocean of peace. Sleep now. Rest well. And good night.